How not to f your kid up.
All right, that's a good introduction.
Don't put that in there.
That's the first thing people are gonna hear. Is that our subtext to is that our subtitle to the podcast?
Oh my gosh.
How not to f your kid up. Don't do what I did.
Don't ever do what I did.
Or maybe they should. That's a little job security for you, right? Get some counseling clients in there.
I mean, reverse psychology, so we're going to tell you all the bad things that we've done as parents and how we've messed up, and just don't do what we did.
Yeah, don't do what we did.
Yeah.
Anyway, good to see you, Christian.
Good to see you. We started out a little bit early. We did a little bit of filming and whatnot.
Yeah,
right?
we're now that we're on the YouTubes, get a little intro video on there, and hopefully build the subscribers. So
subscriber base.
Yeah, so if you listen to us on whatever podcast
–
platform,
Spotify, App Store,
Google
else?
Play, or
Google
whatever
Play.
Google's calling it now. Go over to YouTube now, and the ones we've done videos of, you can see videos. Otherwise, you can still listen to them on YouTube. So.
All right. Well, as always, we got a nice, rich topic for you guys today.
Yeah.
And we are going to jump into some cigars and whiskey. I don't know, whatever else Jesus has for us. So let's roll.
All right.
We are the Old Fashioned Dad Podcast, seeking to love dads and men through the person and work of Jesus Christ, while entering into tough conversations on marriage, mental health, sex, and parenting, all while sipping good whiskey. Christian, we got some whiskey in front of us. We got some cigars in front of us.
It's good. I need some whiskey for this topic.
Little cheers.
It's the topic.
No guy wants to talk about.
I was gonna say all men love talking about.
Oh man, all men, especially all men in church want to talk about.
Especially in your accountability group.
Oh my gosh.
Do people still have those?
I get triggered when I hear that word, accountability.
I know. It's my early 20s.
Man, how many books have I read on this topic? This is my first time trying that.
Yeah, tastes like a fistful of bourbon.
So, I'm glad you said that too, because that is exactly what the title of this whiskey brand is. So, Fistful of Bourbon, blend of 5 straight bourbon whiskeys. A little bit light on the proof for me in terms of bourbon, 90 proof.
Sure. It's very drinkable.
But it's coming from, proverbial drumroll, William Grant and Sons.
Am I supposed to know that name? Or?
Yes, you're absolutely supposed to know that name.
Sorry.
Why don't you know that name by now?
I don't know. I think it's because you have failed in educating me.
As a whiskey Jedi?
Yes, as my go-to whiskey guy.
So William Grant and Sons is a big conglomerate that owns a ton of Scotch labels, and I was having to look them up.
Okay.
But some of the ones that you might know, the Balvenie, Glen. I never know how to pronounce this one. It's either Glenfiddich or Glenfiddich.
Ah, yes, I've heard that one.
Yes.
I know I've tried that one.
I almost want to say, I don't want to say it yet, but let me double check. Tullamore Dew is another one. That's an Irish whiskey. Come on. I want to say Monkey Shoulder. Ooh, Hendrick's Gin.
Okay. I remember the Tyler and Chad on the Honest Cigar Experience drinking some Monkey Shoulder. That was the first time I'd heard of it.
Monkey Shoulder. I wanted to say Glenlivet was in there, but maybe I'm wrong on that one. So
okay.
Glenlivet is one of the first scotches that I've had to drink.
Okay.
What do you think so far?
It's good. I mean, it's a pretty mild, drinkable bourbon, which goes well with our cigars, which are kind of I wouldn't say mild, maybe a medium. As far as the cigar,
darker
range.
roast,
yeah, dark roast, which is from who? Who's the cigars are provided by?
Yeah, so cigars this time around have been graciously supplied to us via Standard & Twain.
Yes, thank you, Standard & Twain.
Thank you. They are great for those of you dads out there looking to plug your spouse for Christmas gifts.
Yes.
A Standard & Twain subscription. This is a blind bag cigar subscription, so they will send you a pack of cigars, usually 2 to 3, and they will just put a number on it, and they don't tell you who the brand is, and you can kind of just make your own tasting notes off it, and then at the time that you want to figure out what brand of cigar it is, they give you a QR code on the tasting notes, and then you can look it up, like what the brand is. So the idea, obviously, is that you're developing your own palate and you're developing your own assumptions about the cigar prior to knowing what the brand is.
Right. Which I like, because they get past the the bias we have towards pricing,
Right.
towards labels,
Labeling and branding.
Yep.
Yeah. Also, we want to give a quick shout out to another one of our sponsors. We're moving up in the world in terms of sponsors, aren't we?
I know. As soon as I get that check, man, I'm going to be so excited.
I know, right? That's going to be great.
It's okay. I'll smoke or drink whatever that sponsorship.
Right now, it's whiskey and cigars that are.
It works for me. It's
we're-
2020.
We got breakfast and dinner covered here. Mm-hmm. But I want to give a quick shout out to our good friend Blackfin Coffee.
Yes. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian, for providing us some delicious coffee, which I've had the opportunity to have a coffee and cigar in the morning.
Yeah, I've been. See, usually I don't do that unless I'm on vacation, and typically that's going to be like on a mountain lake or at the beach or something. And there's something about that environment that makes me want to do cigar and coffee in the morning.
Well, lately in Seattle, Washington, there hasn't been much to be excited about with lockdowns and stuff like that. So I need to find every opportunity I can get to turn every day into somewhat of a vacation.
There you go.
And so if I have to trick myself into having coffee and cigar in the morning to do that in my backyard, all right, that's what I'm going to do.
That's what you got to do.
Either way, thank you, Brian. For all of you who don't know, Brian is a friend of ours, and he is he's bootstrapping his business from the ground up. He does everything in terms of coffee roasting, and he brews a delicious coffee, blackfincoffee.com,
Yep.
and then at blackfincoffee, or it might just be at blackfin on Instagram.
Well, and we did an episode with him, so you can go back. I don't remember what episode number, but it was in the first
Pre-20,
10.
pre-episode 20.
Yeah, so it was one of the earlier ones. So he was gracious enough to come on and have a conversation with us. And
But he makes a delicious coffee that I have actually been able to do a signature roast with him on, Denim and Whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
So check out the Denim and Whiskey blend, which I personally prefer and like, but there's a bunch of other blends on there that he really likes that I think he does a great job on. So if you're into supporting small business, which right now is super key, especially with all the lockdowns, and you want some artisanal coffee, ooh, who doesn't want artisanal coffee?
yeah, I love it.
Artisanal bourbon, artisanal cigars, artisanal coffee. Makes sense. So go check them out. We'd appreciate it.
Yep.
So we've got a topic at hand that I think is kind of an important one, but one that I don't think that many people, men especially, know how to really navigate in the church
Or outside the church.
or outside the church. Yeah, actually anywhere.
Seen
How about
as-
anywhere?
Probably seen as less of an issue outside the church, but within the church,
It's probably more accepted outside the church.
it definitely is.
We, dads, gents, talking about porn.
Pornography, which comes from the Greek.
Porneo.
I don't think
Porneo?
that's right.
I don't know. There's
I just know
there's a Greek word in there
Right.
that, any rate, porn, pornography, nudie mags.
Do they still make those?
Surprisingly, they probably still do, even with all the digital content that's around.
Right.
You think that would have gone out of business, but it
Right.
apparently hasn't.
Well, I'm amazed. I mean, I wouldn't say it doesn't have anything to do with it, but I'm amazed how much money the porn industry makes, considering how much free content there's out there. Like, people are so addicted that they'll pay for porn, even though it's readily available.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess that's a different topic. I don't know.
Going to Mars Hill for so long, you always heard from the pulpit that that the porn industry is what drives like the advances in a lot of technology and internet speeds. And that people spend more on pornography than all professional sports combined. At least that was a statistic that was always reported, and it was reported very confidently.
Right.
So I never batted an eye at it.
Right. Well, and I think, this was, what year is it? So, it's probably 8 years, 10 years ago,
Yeah,
last time
2012.
I heard that. And part of it was that I think it was I want to say 40% of all internet sites were porn sites, which is crazy considering how much content's out there.
Yeah.
And, I guess it reveals the human heart, and our capacity for lust and whatnot. I don't know. What direction did you have in mind to take this conversation? Obviously, as Christian dads, porn is something we frown upon. I like to say for obvious reasons, but maybe it's not obvious in this day and age. I don't know.
Well, I wanted to take somewhat of a maybe a forensic, if you would, look at pornography and the approach the church has towards it, as well as maybe even a personal approach. I'll speak for myself, and maybe just the impacts and the effects that it's had on my marriage, and even parenting as kind of a byproduct.
Okay.
So, but does that sound all right with you?
Do it.
Do it. Yeah.
Is this the point where our listeners switch to the next episode?
Yeah, maybe, or they get really angered or really hooked on it.
Really uncomfortable.
Yeah, really uncomfortable. I mean, I'll tell you right from the get-go that porn has been really devastating for me.
Yeah, me too.
Like massively devastating. Like soul crushing. Pull my hair out, figuring that like this is going to be the way things are going to go. Like this is the sin, this is the focus for the rest of my life, and that I'm just going to have to repeatedly, like the Bible talks about, Paul dealt with a thorn in his side.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be a lifelong thorn in your side.
Yeah, this is just what it is. And every time that I, had read any book, I think the one book that comes to mind, I want to say it was written by John Eldridge, but I could be wrong, is Every Man's Battle.
That was not an Eldridge book.
Okay.
But I have read that book. Is that Joshua Harris?
That might be. I know he wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Right. I could be mistaken. I kind of read all that stuff at the same time.
They all kind of like were espousing the same principles and values and approaches.
Right. Kind of early 2000s. That's kind of the stuff I was into in my 20s. So.
Yeah, same here. But at any rate, reading those books and hearing from other men at the time that were, leaders, maybe further on in their faith, they would say things like, "Oh man, I don't really struggle with pornography anymore."
What?
Yeah.
Who says that?
Yeah. And I would just I would raise an eye like, "Are you even a dude? Are you even a guy? How is that possible?" Because I couldn't wrap my brain around like how somebody could wrestle with pornography and then just overcome it just like that.
Sure.
Like turning off a light switch, and then I would hear the testimonies from these guys that had struggled with it, and they would say things like, yeah, I prayed to God and I'd worked on it, and God just took the desire away. And I was like, I don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't understand that either.
I don't
doubt that. I mean, hopefully that's the case for some men.
Yeah. And so through a lot of I don't mean to trigger you with this word, accountability meetings, with different community groups and friends and church leaders, and going to a lot of different seminars, because the church always had like some sort of small group for men, but it was always focused on sexual sin and porn.
Sure. Which I mean, considering how ubiquitous it seems to be a struggle for most men, it's not surprising that it's also exhausting.
It is exhausting, because it makes you feel like you are forever the problem, and there is no hope of overcoming, and like you will just be kind of this, especially if you struggle with pornography inside of a marriage, like you're just always going to be the spouse that is kind of handicapped. You're just going to be the spouse that is like, man, I'm the thing bringing the marriage down. I'm the thing that's, the issue, the problem.
Yeah.
And I always kind of viewed viewing pornography and sexual sin within the church as like, the church says there is no hierarchy to sin, like, or at least God treats sin all the same, which I'm
there's not like a worse sin than another sin.
Right,
it's all disobedience to God. Yeah.
But it always felt like sexual sin was the worst sin.
Sure. Which, I mean, I don't know if this is biblical or not, which, I mean, I would still make the argument that it is, because it deals with our identity, because we are sexual beings.
Wait a second. You're getting on a whole nother plane here. You're talking about sexuality and identity and...
Yeah. I mean, I just say that, I mean, maybe you can make an argument that all sin deals with our identity, but I think there's something more at our core with our sexuality that affects us holistically, as opposed to like, I stole something once. Which I don't think that we have as many issues with, my identity is as a kleptomaniac or whatever,
Definitely don't hear about that as much in the church.
Not so much, but
I mean, when anytime anytime you're involved in church and they're talking about male issues, what's predominantly the thing that they're addressing?
Small penis size. No, porn. Sorry, porn.
What accountability group are you in?
Apparently not the right one. We have to be explicit on this one. Just
I don't want to be a part of that pastoral meeting. But yeah, I mean, most of the accountability men's issues were always around sexual sin and the use of pornography.
Yeah.
And so maybe we need to back up a second. Is pornography use bad?
Are you asking me or are you asking our audience?
Both.
Both, okay. I would say yes. I mean, it seems obvious to me, but because, I mean, Scripture is very clear about marriage, about not coveting what our neighbor has, not lusting.
There's another trigger word for me, lusting.
Lust,
oh
yeah,
my God,
yeah.
I'm struggling with lust.
Right. Which is a little bit of a...
It's a cop-out.
Well, I was going to say it's kind of a churchy word. Like, people who aren't Christians don't talk about
it packages it up nicely, what you're really...
Right.
Yeah.
You're desiring something that's not yours, essentially.
I'm lusting. Well, what are you lusting after?
It's it means coveting, but specifically in a sexual desire.
There we go.
So it's a sub-brand of coveting. But, yeah, I mean, I'd say it does, and it has a really devastating impact. I mean, practically, because I think it teaches men, whether married or single, it teaches them a very unhealthy view of sexuality, unhealthy way to objectify women as as body parts, not as humans made in the image of God. It impacts, if you're a single dude, you may not think it impacts you, but I mean, you will carry that into your marriage. I've experienced that. I mean, there's baggage that comes with that. Even if it's something in the past, it's not something you currently deal with. Like, there's still that like comparison of, your wife can never, match up to, kind of the unnatural and artificial elements of porn.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Like, I think it took me a long time to come to grips with, as much as I said that I didn't want to have pornography be a thing in my life. I think one of the biggest reasons why it was still part of my life is because I wasn't really being honest with myself. Is that I did like it.
Sure.
And that it was serving a function. It was, and I viewed. I mean, even pornography is already selfish in general. Like,
it's already what?
It's already selfish.
Okay.
You're satisfying really basic urges and needs.
Sure.
And but even the desire that I had to have it not be a part of my life was also selfish. Like, I wasn't wanting it to be out of my life simply because I wanted to, like, one, I saw it as wrong, or I didn't want to glorify God, but I wasn't looking at it like, I want to glorify God, and this thing is preventing me from doing that. I just simply wanted it gone because it was painful, and I didn't like the consequences. And the consequences being, like, I'd have to, like, deal with the fact that I was idolizing something else over God, and then also I was breaking marriage covenant with my wife. Mm-hmm. And so I think there was even like I said before, selfishness in that, but I wanted it. And I think that's for a long time I just really wasn't being honest with myself. I don't know if you ever experienced any of that.
No, that sounds totally unfamiliar. No, I mean, I think that's pretty true. I mean, you kind of you mentioned about the selfishness aspect of it, and it is very selfish. I mean, the goal of pornography is to ejaculate, right?
Yeah.
It's to satisfy your sexual urges.
You think Corey from SSF would be excited with that word?
Yeah, I think he loves that word. But it is. It's very like, how can I use this person, image, body part, whatever, to satisfy yourself. And if that becomes the pattern, then you're going to treat your spouse that way. You're going to treat women that way. Like, it's something I don't, by God's grace, maybe He can, heal you of this or whatever. But the byproduct of that is even just going through life, you tend to look at women in an objectified manner. You know, are they attractive? Are they hot?
Yeah.
Do they have big boobs? Whatever. Like,
Right.
I really like those yoga pants. Like, that's not, as Christian men, married or unmarried, how we're supposed to be going through life and treating the daughters of, other fathers or of God.
Yeah.
And getting into the psychology of it, there is an addictive element of it in how it wires your brain to think about women, to kind of that pleasure center of your brain. I mean, it's very much like talk about technology and social media. Like, when you do that, you're wiring yourself to need that that feeling that comes with the end result of porn.
And the addiction thing is something that the pornography industry really capitalizes on, and it really also, whether they know it or not, unintentionally gets at some of the core issues that men deal with, which is laziness. Now,
Who are you calling lazy?
I know, right? I work hard. I deserve, like, we're lazy in a sense that, I'll speak for myself. How about that?
Okay.
I'm lazy in the sense that I determine how much I'm going to do, and then the laziness really comes out in the way that I exercise entitlement. So like, I deserve this, and I worked hard, or this is stressful, so I deserve this. And then there's a lot of times where I rationalized that, hey, look, it's all right. I'm going to look at porn, and I can just go and ask my wife for forgiveness. I can just go and ask for grace, and she's a Christian, she loves Jesus, she'll understand. And I mean,
She won't be wounded or hurt or disappointed at all.
yeah, no, and I can't tell you how many times that that damaged the relationship, that damaged the marriage, and
Sure.
it broke trust. But I think the pornography industry really capitalizes on that emotional and physical dependence that pornography can create, because there is a biological component to it.
Sure.
I have people that come into my office for counseling that struggle with all kinds of addiction, and sex addiction is one of them. And the porn industry does a really good job of, for any guys that have ever viewed pornography, it's a really colorful thing. Like, there's a lot of brightness in the videos, and it's very colorful, and everybody seems very happy about what's going
Sure,
on.
it's in the world's terms, it's a much more enhanced version of reality that you can't replicate in real life. And so, we have unrealistic expectations of what sexuality should be, of
Right.
what a relationship should be.
Right, and so I do hear people say things like, what's wrong with, not many Christians, but a lot of non-Christians,
Sure.
What's wrong with, pornography? It's just, as long as two consenting adults.
Right.
But, it's changing the way that our neural pathways encounter and experience sex, and then it cultivates our sexual appetites. And so I know there's a lot of men out there that when they go to get sexually intimately involved with their wife, their expectation has been influenced and informed by the amount of pornography
Sure.
that they've seen, and they don't know otherwise, because
Right.
they're like, well, this is what I see, and these are what my urges are saying, and there's such a strong association that's there based on, like, our brain chemicals, our dopamine that's released anytime you sit down and do something pleasurable. The brain is just releasing dopamine and endorphins, and we're like, this is great, and so when we don't have that same release when we are encountering true biblical sexual intimacy, we're just like, what the heck?
Right.
What the heck? This doesn't make any sense. I'm angry.
Right.
And so there is a laziness and a selfishness that happens when we get involved with looking at pornography.
Right. Well, even if you cognitively recognize that, it still has that effect on your brain. Like, you can't get it. You can't intellectually, consciously unwire that. Even though if you recognize that's happening, like, it's going to happen. If you've wired your brain that way. I think it's really interesting you're talking about the laziness aspect of it, and to expand on that. I would say that, at least for me, the effects that I've seen is that, when maybe things don't work out in the bedroom the way I want them to, I find myself justifying, well, I've got these needs and my wife's not meeting them, this and that. Mm-hmm. And the way that you're talking about, like, it's easier just to do it and ask for forgiveness. that's assuming you're actually honest with your spouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many men are actually honest that they're like that's a struggle, that's what they're doing, you know? Even if you're not honest and she doesn't know and isn't being, you know, wounded and disappointed from that knowledge, it still affects your marriage. It still affects
Yeah.
that, because essentially what you're doing is, instead of doing the hard work of loving, pursuing, meeting your wife where she is, in a place that emotionally and physically, you know, pleases her, you're just thinking about what I can get out of it. You know, and that's I'm probably going to butcher this quote, and I don't remember who said it, but it was basically that pornography is the relationship killer.
Yeah.
Is that you'll turn to that because it's easy, and your relationship, you know, with your spouse will suffer, whether or not they know that's what's going on.
And even on a psychological level, the secular world is catching on to this.
Yeah, I mean, even non-Christians are, you know, if they're being honest, they're starting to say, hey, you know, maybe this porn thing isn't great for relationships, if you care about relationships, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, it completely cultivates a person's biological appetites.
Yeah.
And we're not, and you know, in terms of appetites, we're not supposed to be mastered by them. You know, we look at, you know, if we looked at somebody and, you know, like their physical appetite was just for food and that's all they were about, they'd be a really obese person, and we look at them and go, wow, you're really unhealthy. You know, or somebody who's like has a physical appetite for meth and that's all they do. I mean, meth will eventually kill you, and overeating will eventually kill you. But when we look at a sexual appetite, unfortunately, in this day and age, there's not a lot of regulation around it. Yeah. I mean, and even the church is not necessarily a great guide. Some churches, I guess, are not a great guide when it comes to the regulation. They just simply say, don't do it outside the context of marriage.
Right.
You know, they're not necessarily giving any guidance as far as, well, how do we approach sexual appetites and how do we engage in those in a godly, Jesus-worshiping manner? Because, I mean, we tend to believe as Christians, at least you and I do, and I know a few other people do too, that everything comes from Christ.
Yeah.
And so we should be very open-minded to glorifying Christ in everything that we do, and that includes sexual appetites.
Right. I mean, so we've kind of framed what we see as, you know, the issue, kind of our experience with it, why it's not good, and the impacts of it. I mean, what are your thoughts on, at least from my perspective, it seems like there was a period in time where the church, or at least, you know, the church we went to, really dealt with it head on. But it seems like it's taken much more of a back seat as an issue. Like, I haven't really heard it addressed. It kind of seems like the elephant in the room that, like, churches don't want to talk about.
Yeah. So is your question is like, what is my perspective on how it was addressed and how it's being addressed now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a big blanket topic. It's probably going to, you know, vary from church to church, region to region, denomination to denomination, that kind of thing. But I mean, if we determine, okay, as Christians, you know, it doesn't glorify God to be addicted to porn, well, where do you go from there?
Sure, yeah. I mean, so the church that we went to, and we've referenced that a lot, was Mars Hill. And for all the good that Mars Hill did, you know, there was some areas that they were not very strong in.
Or heavy-handed if they were strong in those areas.
Yeah, that was the other word I was going to use, heavy-handed.
Yeah.
But, you know, Mars Hill was very, very aggressive on the issue of pornography when it came to men. So in a lot of ways, they would sin hunt, and men were kind of reduced to one issue. You know, if the male wasn't, the husband, the father was not leading in his marriage or in his family, yeah. You know, likely, you know, the next question, if you're in a pastoral meeting or a leader meeting, is like, hey, how much porn are you looking at?
Right. How much you masturbating?
Yeah, you know, those sorts of things, and it was very much like, eventually, you know, if you stuck around it long enough, you would break down and like, well, this much and this much, and you know, you'd be put on a plan of correction like you're an employee at a corporation.
Sure.
You know, and eventually you come back in 6 months. All right, I'm not looking at porn this much, and I'm not masturbating this much.
Right.
You know, and I think in some ways their hearts were right, because men are very visually driven, and that's not to say women aren't either, but men and women are built a little bit differently.
Sure. Well, and you're seeing, I mean, to the, you know, use this word twice in this podcast, the ubiquitousness of porn, it seems like women are being rewired, and I want to say like 40% of porn use is like women or something these days.
It's gone up.
Which I would argue is not a natural thing, as far as the visual nature of men versus
Right.
women. One of the things that so I don't know if you ever went through like the redemption groups.
I did.
And I've been through several of them, and depending on who was leading it.
What were
had
redemption groups
varying-
again, just so our
Sure.
listeners?
So that was a ministry at Mars Hill where essentially you joined a redemption group. It was the women. It'd be a small group.
It's like group counseling.
Yeah, group counseling essentially.
Yeah.
But then that's where I was introduced to kind of biblical counseling, that concept.
Right.
Divided up by obviously the men in a group, women in a different group, and essentially, there was a format and stuff, but some people could say that it was sin hunting.
Yeah.
Where you're basically trying to point out the sin and then kind of get in their face about it and stuff. I had one that was not a great experience, and another one that was had a lot more grace in it and pointed to the gospel a lot more, and that was a much better experience. But anyway, what was my point here? I guess I was saying that I don't remember. Why don't you start talking?
Yeah. I think you were kind of pointing at some of the mixed bag reviews that the Redemption Group brought out, and because I was, what we're talking about how the church addresses or did address, at least in our experience with Mars Hill, versus how the church is addressing it now, and I think Mars Hill kind of landed more on the aggressive side of things, and yeah,
which to an extent I appreciate, because at the time, one of the big things early on was that they were a church in a city that was one of the least church cities in America.
Yeah.
And I think largely due to what God did through Mars Hill, they had a huge chunk of single young men that were members there, which is unheard of as far as the demographic in churches in an urban environment. And I think that created a new trajectory and legacy for so many men who eventually became dads and fathers, and it's been a huge positive impact. One of the things I remember, Mark saying from the pulpit that was very convicting to me, and when I struggle with those things, I still remember, because it deals with identity, was do you want to be the porn guy? Is that who you want to be as a husband? Like, and you could argue, well, maybe there's some shame in that and whatever, but I think that's kind of key if you're trying to boil it down. Okay, like, who am I? What am I about?
Yeah.
Am I the guy that like secretly looks at porn after my wife goes to bed?
Right.
That's not cool. It's not how I want to be. That doesn't glorify God or
Yeah.
help anything,
Yeah. And so I think Mars Hill had their approach, and it's not to say that they were completely wrong in how they approach it, because I think some men do need a 5-pound sledgehammer to the head.
Sure.
Because they just simply don't get it.
Right.
But then there's other men, and that's why you got to go on a case-by-case basis that, they need a lighter touch.
Sure. Well, and that was what you could say is kind of they tended to deal with everyone kind of the same way, which was pretty heavy-handed. And I think in general, Mark's approach in his saying of saying, young men, men of their 20s are kind of like, an old pickup truck. Mm-hmm. Like, they handle better and go in a straight line when they got some
load on it.
Yeah, they got a load on it.
Yeah.
And I think that can be true. If you have very low expectations and there's no pressure on young men, like, they tend to wander. They tend to not have a lot of direction.
And I think where the issue lies for men is, like, men just can't always receive, like, just a barrage of punches to the face.
Sure, you can't. If your primary experience at church is rebuke, you at some point you have to see the mercy and grace and hope that God provides.
And I personally saw, not necessarily directly for myself, but for other men in my life, them fall away from the church because, they just got beat up so much.
Sure.
And whatever issue might be going on in their marriage, whatever issue might be going on in their family, the church always pointed back to, well, you're not really leading because you're looking at porn.
Sure. No, there's definitely some collateral damage that I know of, firsthand. So.
Yeah. And so, I think, yes, please. The church, pouring more bourbon here. The church may not be necessarily addressing it, at least in our neck of the woods.
From what I've seen, I haven't seen much talk about it.
Maybe because Mars Hill served as somewhat of a cautionary tale to, like, hey, don't do it this way. But it could be a pendulum swing. It went hard one way, now it's kind of going hard the other way, and maybe it'll eventually level out. But I think that when it comes to the issue of any sin, it's not good to sin hunt. And I know that we're talking specifically about porn, and I do agree. Coming back to your identity piece, like sexual identity, like when it comes to the issue of sexual sin, that has a far greater probability of being staining to the soul.
I think the consequence for it is much higher than a lot of other sins.
Yeah, because it really does deal with something very specific to human beings. Like lots of people might say, like, well, we're all animals, and animals just have sex or whatever. But there is something very specific to when you have sex with somebody, either through your eyes on porn or literally, like there is a joining of souls.
Yeah.
That happens,
yeah.
and it's very hard to kind of unsqueeze that toothpaste, so to speak.
Right, and I say that's universal. That's men and women. I mean,
yeah,
not uniquely guys. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely not uniquely guys.
And I'd say because of our tend to be more shallow or more visual, that it's a little easier for us to maybe detach. But I think it still has its impact.
So for me in my journey, we'll come back to that. With pornography, it's been very much like being real and being very candid with my wife, of treating it like an addiction, in that I have to be honest with her about what I'm dealing with and what I'm experiencing, and I have to do it very preemptively. I can't do it just in the moment.
No, so you're talking like, honey, I have this temptation now, or is it like, hey, last night I messed up, and you go like, what's that look like for you?
It used to be very much like, hey, I looked at some stuff,
I'm quote struggling.
Yeah, I'm struggling. Can you
some
please pray
thoughts.
for me? Yeah, I looked at a couple images or whatever,
Sure.
almost kind of downplaying it a little bit.
Sure, the whole vagueness of like trying to like make it not sound as
Yeah,
bad
and
as-
every wife who's ever had a husband that struggles with that goes, come on.
Right.
Like, you looked at porn.
Right.
Can you call it what it is, And every woman that's
You
listening to this
whacked off
podcast,
to-
every woman that's
yeah.
listening to this podcast claps right now. But
all three women listen
yeah,
to it.
I know, right? I know.
Including
at
my
least one.
mom, which is really awkward.
Hi, Christian's mom. At any rate, yeah. So, being preemptive, meaning like, you know what? I'll just be honest. Like, probably since we're talking about the issue now, like I know how the enemy works in my own life. In terms of bringing up temptation, I'm gonna go home and tell my wife, like, hey, I just did a podcast on pornography. I just want to let you know that, just so that you can be in prayer, because I know how the enemy tempts me.
Sure. Well, and I'd say that there's many ways to deal with temptations and sin, and I'd say bringing it into the light and having conversations about it is the biggest way to disarm the enemy.
Yeah, because what I've known for me is, if I have a temptation to look at pornography, the natural MO has always been to, like, all right, just grind it out, downplay it,
Grind it out. Rub it out? Grind it? No? Are we talking about?
just grit it, like, meaning like ignore it,
Yeah.
pray through it, read your Bible and hope that, it'll go away.
Yeah.
And sometimes, sometimes that does work, but that's not usually the case. It's like you're just kicking the can down the road.
Sure.
So I found for myself being preemptive in that is really important. And the reason why is because I want to show up and actually want to be a good husband.
Sure.
I want to show up and I actually want to be a good dad. I have 2 daughters. My goodness. Like,
Sure.
God wanted to, like, deal with the pornography in my life. He gave me a wife and he gave me 2 daughters.
Yeah.
And like, I can't tell you, I cannot, I can't even imagine looking at porn now, knowing what I know about what it means to be a father to 2 daughters.
Yeah. Well, I would say, I mean, I have a son, and I'm thinking about, like, I know this has been a huge issue and struggle in my life. Like, is this going to be the same for my son? Because I don't have any clear answers as like to how to help him position in such a way where he naturally resists it or whatever. Like, I don't have any answers because in my 20s I was a mess.
Yeah.
Some would say I'm still a mess, but
You're good in my book.
But I mean, I think calling it what it is and getting rid of the vagueness can really really help you see the ugliness of the sin.
Yeah.
Because the whole porn industry is built on facade. It's built on things that aren't real.
Yep.
It's fake. And to me, being able to call it that, like, I'm gonna get real here. If you got kids in the room, you're probably a bad parent if they're still listening to this at this point. But like when I had a girlfriend before I was married, and I'm fooling around and I'm trying to get in her pants. If she was feeling convicted of that much, she'd be like, "What are you doing?" I'm not gonna say I'm trying to have sex with you, but if I call it, if I name it, it brings to mind. Okay, like it kind of gets rid of the sexiness of it, and I'm like, oh, I'm trying to fornicate, and
It's a weird F word that you just used.
it is a weird F word. We don't use it too often, but my point is that if we can see it for what it is, the ugliness that it is, it kind of takes away the allure and desire of it, at least temporarily in that moment. At least that's helped for me. Or thinking if God brings to mind that, like, hey, this woman that you're looking at online, like, that's someone's daughter.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Not only is it God's daughter, but like it's actually someone else's daughter
Right.
that you are defiling in your mind. And,
Yep.
And so to me that's convicting. It kind of brings the reality of like what I'm actually doing, and strips away kind of the facade of it.
And I think the shift for me, I think like the missing piece, like there was a desire to not want to do it anymore. Because like I think I had some kind of, a very broad perspective. I'm like, I'm not doing what God wants me to do, and there was still something missing there. And I think, it was within the last couple of years, or maybe 3 years ago, I was reading through the Old Testament, and I just saw time and again like this very faithful God who just loves his people time and time again, just doing so much, literally bending over backwards to be in relationship with them, giving them so many blessings that they did not deserve it. And they continued to just do everything within their power to say, screw you, God. I don't want anything to do with you. And if you read the Old Testament, yeah. or even from like a marriage stance, like God just got his heart broken time and time and time again. And I can tell you, like, any time that I've ever looked at porn in the past, God's feelings were never a factor for me. I would never go, oh man, I'm literally breaking God's heart doing this. I'm literally betraying him. It was never that. And I remember hearing from somebody that we always sin against God first, especially with sexual sin.
Sure.
We're sinning against God first.
Right, that's our primary person we're sinning against.
Yeah, and like David says this, against you, God, have I sinned. And I never got that. I was like, well, it seems like I sinned against my wife. Which that's how I always looked at it. But like God has helped reshape my perspective. They're like, man, no, I'm really breaking God's heart on this. And to see God differently has really radically transformed how I approach the temptation and how I even deal with the temptation. Now it's like, there's still temptation.
Sure.
Like that hasn't gone away. But I'm approaching it differently. Like, man, I really want to worship you, God, because I really don't want to break your heart. I really don't want to do that. And, in addition to, like, I don't want to have a warped view of women. I don't want to see them as objects and commodities. I want to see them as daughters of the Most High.
Right. Well, and looking at kind of the human element of it, I mentioned, thinking about them as like remembering like there's someone's daughter. It's also highly likely that they've been abused in some way, and you're essentially continuing that pattern of abuse and using them. And if you,
that's a big one.
we haven't even gotten into the topic of sex trafficking and how that's huge,
and that plays into this conversation.
Pornography, the industry. Which is really sad. I don't know anyone who's like for sex trafficking, but I do know people who are like, yeah, porn's fine, but like they're intertwined.
Yeah, tacitly, you're kind of you're okay with it.
Right.
If you're looking at porn.
Right. You're taking advantage of a wounded, woman.
Yep.
For your own selfish pleasure.
Yeah, and I think that's what's even harder as a Christian man, knowing that, like, man, I've participated in such ugliness, and even and there is a defilement that happens to your own soul. Fortunately, we have a Savior that cleanses us from that, but at the same time, what we don't want to do is be grace perverts, where we just like continue. All right, we're going to ask for forgiveness, and no change happens.
Sure, cheap grace, where you're essentially saying, "Yeah, I'm sinning, but God forgives me, so it's not a big deal."
Yeah, and
it is a big deal, such a big deal that Jesus died on the cross for
huge,
your sin, for
like
your
life-altering,
porn addiction.
life-altering, cataclysmic event. So, I think. I mean, I think I can safely say, and I don't think any you or I or any dad might say outside of the church, yeah, porn's good.
Right.
Porn's good. It's real healthy for the marriage.
Neutral.
Yeah. There might be a handful of people that might go, yeah, it's good for a relationship, but I think that at least for me, I can say having a different perspective on who God is, being preemptive in my my desires and my feelings as it comes to temptation, and being transparent with my wife, which takes time to cultivate.
Yeah.
That's not an overnight thing. There's a lot of building on that one, as well as being frequently in the Word and prayer, and having accountability.
Yeah, what's that look like? I mean, if we've got men listening, whether you're single, dad, husband, whatever, I mean, where do you go? I mean, if that's an active sin in your life, what do you do? I mean, I'll put out the first recommendation, which would be bring it into the light. If you're married, bring it to your wife. There might be different thoughts on this, but have her be, at least an element of your accountability.
I fully agree with that. And so some practical things that I did, like I was struggling, like smartphones are like having a loaded gun in your pocket for
point right at your dick.
Yeah, exactly. For a dude that struggles with pornography, and that's well over 90% of guys out there.
Yep.
So having that smartphone, so I was like, well, I seem to can't function without a smartphone, which is its own issue, but
different type of addiction.
But I was like, man, I got to figure out a way to be able to have a smartphone and not look at pornography, or not just endlessly wrestle with this. And so for me, I asked my wife, I said, hey, I need you to put parental controls on my phone, and I'm not talking about that, those safe browsers. There's a couple of browsers out there that I think are Christian, at its core. I can't remember, Safe Eyes, I think is one of them. Yep. But I just said, hey, I can't have a web browser on my phone. I just can't.
Yeah.
And or Facebook or Instagram, which are also like backdoor loopholes to looking at porn.
Yeah.
And I was like, I need you to put parental controls on here. I need you to have the passcode to that. So I took a web browser off my phone, and I took the App Store off my phone, and I've been happy without them. Because it literally allows me to not find workarounds in the moments of temptation.
Sure. Which I think is smart if that's an issue for you. Like, because I mean the downside, I guess, with maybe some of the Christian-based things, because I think Smart Eyes does like a type of thing where, like, if you go to a questionable site, it pings your accountability partner.
It sends out a report.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is great, but I mean, if you want to sin, you'll find a way around it. Mm-hmm. So it requires definitely a level of honesty there. Yeah,
but I think that there's a lot of fear and some distortion around involving your wife in this conversation. Like, I've ran into guys that are like, we don't want to concern our wives with this. This is an issue that as men we are dealing with, and we want to bring it to other men, which I just think allows for more secrecy.
Yeah, I think that's because I mean, I think that's foolish. It's definitely going to be wounding to a certain degree to our wives, and that's something you have to deal with, graciously, humbly. But hopefully you can frame it in a way of like, I want to be transparent. Like, I want to love you better. I don't want this to be a thing in my life. help me with it. Like, let's do this together. Because if we're really partners in this marriage like God says we are, combined flesh, like my issues with pornography, whether you know about it or not, affect both of us.
Right. And by not engaging in looking at pornography, and then 2, by being preemptive about your temptations and what you're feeling way before the temptations come to, like, I don't know, a head.
I'm such junior high.
I know, me too. I thought the same thing. We are actually engaging in intimacy development by one, we're saying, like, hey, I'm not going to look at pornography, meaning I'm going to go cultivate like sexual intimacy with my wife. But then also when we are engaging with our wives by saying, hey, this is what's going on inside of me, my head, my heart, my mind, we are also engaging in intimacy development. I think sometimes men get too focused on, when we hear the word intimacy, we just automatically think, well, that's just sexuality. But
it's not just sexuality?
no, surprisingly. Intimacy goes far beyond that, and we want to be intimate spiritually, we want to be intimate emotionally and psychologically, and so by inviting our wives in, we are developing holistically intimacy, and we are teaching our wives to go, man, we can help, because men and women are supposed to be helpers to each other. Husbands and wives are supposed to be helpers, and so we're allowing them in, and they're building trust. We're building trust with them, and becoming a safe place to go, man, I can go to my wife. I don't know how many men right now can say, yeah, I can go to my wife when it comes to the issue of porn.
Sure, yeah. And I'd say to kind of add to that, or put a not to put too fine a point on this, but give your wife permission to ask you, how are you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, are you struggling? Did you look at porn last night?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of wives, I'd imagine if I was in their shoes,
they feel scared to do it.
Right, they don't want to ask because, like, what if they say yes?
Yeah, exactly. They feel scared.
Yeah.
They feel scared to do it, and they feel like they might get a kind of a dismissive response or an angry response.
Sure. Or they know they're going to be hurt, if they are.
Right. And so I know that in my marriage, I've, like, if my wife goes out, or she's attuned to my patterns. She's like, hey, I'm going to go to bed and I'm staying up longer. She'll go like, hey, are you all right? Are you okay? Yeah. And I'll tell her, I'm like, yeah, it's been kind of a hard day. I'm kind of feeling some things.
Sure.
And she's like, well, why don't you come to bed? Nice. Why don't you come lay down? Yeah.
And then you get it on. All right.
Will you take care of business, or we just go to bed? Because we also have 2 small children. And,
exactly. You're probably exhausted. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's key to recognize too. Like know what your patterns are. Like when you're weak. Like I'd imagine for most men, it's, I had a hard day. I'm stressed out. I'm tired. There's no one that's gonna know. There's your red flag for, like, prime, opportunity for looking at porn.
And that's really important too for how we enter into, if you want to call it sin hunting and sin killing, is how do you battle that sin? First knowing who God is and knowing what worship is, as well as knowing how are you attacked, how are you tempted. So when you go into battle, you don't usually go into battle without any armor or any weapon.
Sure. You have a game plan. I mean, there's always a plan. You don't go into battle without, like, okay, here's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and typically you're going to go into battle, I mean, at least spiritually speaking, like, hopefully rested, but that's not always the case. And you like you said, you have a game plan. So, like, for me, I know that if I've had a particularly stressful couple of days, and I'm staying up late, and I have, I have a bourbon or I have a whiskey, I'm like, man, I probably need to be careful here. I probably need to be careful because, like, the temptation may be high, and just the enemy can get at me a lot easier because my defenses, my vigilance is down. Sure. So, like, I have to be very aware of that, and I have to share that with my wife. I'm like, hey, for the good of my own sake, for our marriage, and for even the raising of our kids, because this does implement parenting, I need you to know this is where I'm at.
Yeah. So you're saying that every evening we record this podcast and have some bourbon, I'm causing you to sin.
Oh, man. No.
Okay, that's good.
Not that.
That's good.
Not that. But
We can keep the podcast going. Okay,
we can keep it going,
Right.
because you can enjoy alcohol in moderation.
It's true.
As far as I remember, because it's not drinking is a sin; it's drunkenness.
Yes, I feel like we did an episode on this.
Go back and listen to our episodes.
Which I
and,
think is actually, looking at the stats, is actually one of our highest listened to ones, which is interesting.
we might get a contender here with the porn episode.
Cool. People Googling porn and they come with this podcast are going to be disappointed.
Son of a... Yeah. Well, we're just going to tell you to go back to the Gospels. I find particular comfort, maybe this is where we start wrapping up things,
Yes.
in 1 Corinthians 10:13, which has been used a lot to address sexual sin, but I think it addresses just temptation in general.
What is that verse?
And I will tell you that
Okay,
verse.
thank you.
Thank you. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, but God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but will prepare a way out for you so that you may stand up underneath it.
Oh, that's good.
1 Corinthians 10:13.
It's like you're girding your loins with the word of God. It's good.
Exactly. So there's a lot of goodness in there, and Scripture is alive. And it should never be treated like a magical incantation that if I just say it, then God will come down and save me. But we should, as husbands and fathers, always have Scripture on our brain to guard ourselves against the schemes of the devil, which you go into Ephesians and you look, and there's Scripture on that too. So I find a lot of great hope in Scripture like 1 Corinthians 10:13. There's other Scripture that I think we can point to, but we have a good, great God that wants to promote health, wants to promote marital unity in our marriage, and wants us to see us live free within Him, not enslaved to our desires, which sexual appetites for pornography are being enslaved to our desires. And so that's what I have for you.
Well, I don't really have anything to add to that. That's pretty good. It's nice, as you like to say, put a nice bow on that.
Put a nice bow on that.
Yeah.
Well, safe to say we wrap up.
Yeah. Wrap it up.
Well, dads, as always, we love you. We care about you, and this is, I think, an important topic that I think Christian, we should probably revisit, maybe a little more nuanced. Kind of did a 30,000-foot view on this one.
Yep.
But if there's something particular within this topic that you thought, I don't know why I keep looking that way, but that you thought that maybe could be addressed or should be addressed in maybe some later episodes, please let us know. We'd love to hear. If there's ways that we can pray for you, talk with you about this, we'd love to.
Yeah. Well, even let us know what's been helpful for you if you struggle with this. What's God shown you? What are some practical things that you've done? Love to share that with our audience as well.
Yep, we're just two dudes right now in a garage with less airplane noise. It seems like.
Yeah, it seems like it.
We're just two dudes in a garage that we are sharing the grace that God has had on us, and hopefully we can impart that to you and know that God loves you. So check us out on the socials: Instagram, Facebook, and now YouTube. We're actually going to have some content on YouTube.
We have it. We're up to date on YouTube.
I'm kind of excited about that one.
Yeah.
I got to dust off the old video editing skills, but I don't think that should be too hard. But until next time, Christian, I've had this was a good discussion, good cigars. Check out Standard & Twain.
Yes.
Check out Fistful of Bourbon, and check out Blackfin Coffee. Am I missing anything?
No, that seems pretty good.
All right, dads. If you're not in lockdown, stay frosty. If you're in lockdown, grab a glass of whiskey. Until then, peace.